Well, so are we in the end times? That is what we're going to discuss today. So the events of the the last couple months, the last year, the last couple years, even the last decade, maybe even longer, have led some to question whether or not we are actually in the end times. This is what has become known as Armageddon. It's not something new. It's been around for quite some time, but will we see it in our lifetime? That is what we're going to unpack in this edition of the Military Wire. So we're going to go deep on this. We're going to go deep with retired colonel and author and chaplain David Giammona and best-selling author Troy Anderson. And so we're going to discuss their latest book, The Military Guide to Armageddon, and the events that are leading up to why some believe we are in fact in the end times. And we're not going to leave you hanging. We're going to actually also discuss what you can do to prepare for the end times. And I will just say that these things that they offer in preparation are things that you should be doing anyway, so you're not going to want to miss it. So welcome to this edition of the Military Wire with Mike Schindler. I am, in fact, Mike Schindler, and this is the podcast where we interview some of America's most elite men and women who have served this country in hopes that you, our viewer, will gain an aha moment that you can apply to your own life. So be sure you subscribe to our channel so that you don't miss these amazing individuals that we have on our show. And I got to put a shout out to our friends at Bone Frog Coffee, founded by my friend, Lieutenant Commander Tim Cruikshank, 25 years with the SEALs. And I will say that a portion of that coffee, every time you purchase either the coffee or the wine, goes to the Navy SEALs Fund to help the families of Navy SEALs. So, Colonel and Troy, welcome to the Military Wire.
Mike, wow, we're just thrilled to be with you today.
It's a great honor, Mike.
Yeah, well, absolutely. I'm honored to have you guys because I dug into your book and I've got so many questions. But before we get to that, I want to set the stage for our viewer just so they understand who you are. Troy, I'm going to start with you so that you can tell our viewers a little bit about you, your best-selling experiences, and why this is such an important subject for you.
Yeah, I've been a journalist for about 3 decades, reporter at the Los Angeles Daily News for many years. Nominated for a Pulitzer Prize at one point back in the early 2000s. And I was executive editor of Charisma magazine. Now I'm executive editor of the Return International. And I've co-written 3 #1 bestsellers, The Babylon Code, Trumpocalypse, and The Military Guide to Armageddon. So for the last decade, I've been investigating this question. Are we really moving into these end time events that the Bible talks about? And so that's been my focus and from a journalistic perspective for the last decade.
Oh, good. So I'm going to quiz you from a journalistic perspective then. So good. That's great to know. Colonel, why don't you share with our viewers a little bit about your background too, sir?
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Just retired from the military in 2018 after 32 years. My last assignment was in San Antonio with the IMCOM, which is Installation Management Command. So I was responsible for all religious support, all 75 Army installations around the world, and with Ken Dahl, the 3-star general who was the IMCOM commander at the time. And it was a fantastic job. And I've been to combat zones in Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Afghanistan, Central America, and I've seen my action, lots of action and lots of combat scenarios. And that's one of the reasons why we wrote the book of The Military Guide to Armageddon. So the church is prepared and ready for some of the things that are already happening and are about to happen. So I really urge you to get the book if you can, because I think it'll be a blessing and a preparation guide for you.
Yeah, so I want to jump to that. For our viewers, this is the book, The Military Guide to Armageddon. I think there's no question that we live in uncertain times, right? I mean, these, especially the last couple years, I think everything kind of flipped on its head. You guys mentioned a poll that's in the book, the Barna poll, that 41% of American adults, 54% of Protestants, and 77% of evangelical Christians believe that the world is now living in the biblical end times. When I first saw that, I said, okay, right, but we've been professing that for decades, if not centuries. So what makes these times different? And David, I'll start with you. Colonel, I'll start with you.
Sure. That's one of the #1 questions we get asked all the time. And The difference is, number one, Israel is a key factor, and we go into depth in that in our book as well. But after 2,000 years of being spread across the world, God brought them back in 1948 in one day after the Balfour Declaration. And so in May 1948, Israel did become a nation after being prophesied for thousands of years it would happen. And very few people believed it to be happening. But that is the harbinger, the key, the fact that, that is really signaling the end of the end times. And yeah, we've been talking about the end times for 2,000 years. So we've been living in the end times since, Christ rose from the dead. But now we're living in the end of the end times. And it would take, longer than this show to explain everything that, indicates that. But that's really one of the main focuses. And so keep your eyes on the Middle East, because it is a key to what will be happening in the future as well.
Mm. So this is so interesting. Troy, I'm going to go to you with this. Why is there a discrepancy between Protestants and evangelicals? I read that number and I went, are Protestants actually, are they more optimistic than evangelicals with these numbers? I mean, they're like optimistic being like, hey, we're not going anywhere. We're sticking around. There's no end times. I mean, why the discrepancy between those two numbers?
Yeah, there's a number of different interpretations of eschatology, end times. You have your pre-millennial and post-millennial and amillennial and all kinds of different variations. And so many of the mainstream Protestant denominations are amillennial, or interpret the Book of Revelation more as an allegory and symbolism and that kind of thing. So it's the reason why the number is so high of evangelicals is they interpret the Book of Revelation, other prophetic books in a literal sense, that the prophets and Jesus were predicting future events, and so that's largely the difference in the interpretations. And so what I've done over the last decade is I've done hundreds of interviews with the most credible people I could possibly find, in terms of faith leaders, everybody from Billy Graham, Tim LaHaye, Hal Lindsey, sort of who's who, different experts in Bible prophecy, and they overwhelmingly believe we're moving into the end times. But then there's even experts at existential risk institutes at Oxford, MIT, and Princeton, who believe that we're approaching the end of human civilization unless humanity takes drastic actions. Oxford has a Future of Humanity Institute where they release an annual report on the top risk facing the world, and they, the top 10 is nuclear war, artificial intelligence run amok, and asteroid strike. And they even cite a global totalitarian government as a possibility and a warning. And if we ever entered into something like that, humanity would be under terrible oppression. So there's sort of on both sides. And of course, there's a recent Lifeway poll said 9 in 10 pastors now see signs of the end times and current events. So there seems to be a consensus in a large segment of Christianity that we may very well be moving into the end time events that Jesus and the prophets talked about.
I don't know if that makes me excited. I don't want to say fearful, but I'm raising 2 daughters, and the last thing I want to do is be raising them in the end times. I mean, I want to talk about this great divide in America. I think we've seen it. I think it's more apparent than ever before that there is a division. I think one of the things that you guys mentioned in your books about how those who profess the Christian faith, Christians, are being persecuted at a more visible rate, even more a greater rate than ever before. So who exactly is the enemy? Is it people that think differently than us, or is there something more spiritual going on when we look at the enemy aspect? David, I'll start with you on that.
Sure. Okay. So we have been at war, physical war, since the inception of mankind for like 5,000-6,000 years. We've only had 268 years of peace in the 5,000-6,000 years of human history. And that's just a parallel, really. Everything you see on the planet that's going on, there's a parallel in the spiritual realm as well. We just don't understand it and sometimes don't feel it, but it's there. So there has been a war between God, the forces of good, and Satan, the forces of darkness, for that time and probably for, long time before that. So it's no wonder that as Satan understands that, he's, by the way, he's playing chess, 11-dimensional chess while we're playing checkers. He's way above what we can even imagine or think as well. And so the forces of darkness are putting together the world government, all these different entities in the world. And so we're not fighting against the president, the current president of the United States, or Congress, or the Democrats, or the liberals and the progressives. Those are just a foretaste of what's really going on. The forces of darkness and is spreading its globally spreading its darkness. You look at astrology, you look at the world of the demonic, you look at the world of one worlders and government, you look at all the things that are happening on the West Coast where you guys are, these Antifa and BLM and all that. These are just pawns that are being used by the forces of darkness to bring about their domination of the world.
So Troy, I'm going to go to you with this, because when I hear David talk about this, part of me is like, well, okay, great. Is there really anything I can do? If I'm sitting here, number one, I have to recognize that this is true. And I'm wondering, how many in the Christian faith or faith in general even believe that this is in fact the end times? I don't know that I've heard that professed many times from the pulpit lately. So I'm hitting you up with a couple questions here. Number one, are you seeing more churches actually talk about the end times? Number one. And number two, what can we do? Okay, so this is going to play out. It's not like I'm moving the chess pieces. It sounds like I'm one of the checker pieces. So, okay, now what? So let's start with the pulpit and then move to, okay, now what?
Yeah, so this is one of the ironies of this whole situation. So, back in the 1960s and 70s, a large amount of the church thought that we were moving, that Jesus Christ, that second coming was approaching. But then there was all these predictions. There's a book that came out in 1988. I think it was 88 Reasons Why Jesus is Returning in 1988, and it sold a couple million copies. And of course, that didn't happen. And so after that, the church sort of largely shied away from teaching on Bible prophecy. So for decades now, there's a relatively small proportion of churches that actually talk about this subject. They just avoid it. And so for decades, most people that go to church haven't heard this kind of stuff. But yet, I mentioned this Lifeway poll says 9 in 10 pastors now see signs of the end times and current events. So they obviously, understand that this is very well going on. They're just not talking about it because if you talk about these kind of things in church, you might, some people may be turned off by it. It may impact donations, attendance, that kind of stuff. So we actually, one of the pastors that wrote the foreword for a book, Dr. Robert Jeffress, he said, this sort of spiritual malpractice not to teach the whole counsel of God. So Paul said that we should teach the whole counsel of God. And so this is not being done in much of the church today, unfortunately. But in terms of what we could do, this is why we wrote this book. First of all, we wanted to wake up the church to what's happening. Obviously, the world's completely changed in the last couple of years, and we're witnessing the loss of religious freedoms and all, this approaching Great Reset, which is sort of a new term for the New World Order. And this push towards some kind of globalized system and all different things that are happening connected to this. And so in this book, we take you through what's called the making of a warrior process. So in the military, they take you from a regular civilian and put you through boot camp and turn you into a soldier who can actually fight in combat and be effective in helping America, win battles and win wars. And so in this book, the general takes his 3 decades of military experience. I take my journalistic, we sort of combine it together to help take you through this making of a warrior process. So essentially, regardless of what happens in the future, persecution increases, more oppression, more people lose their jobs, all these different things happen. The key is to draw as close to God as possible and learn how to walk in the supernatural power, protection, and provision of the Holy Spirit. This is how all the Bible characters, the early Christian church, this is how they got through the tough times that they went through, is drawing close to God. And so this book is designed to, help you do that.
See, and I do love this book. I made it all the way through the book. I underlined it. I highlighted. I made notes. It's an exceptional book. I encourage every person to pick it up to read it. David, you mentioned a subject in there that is just really close to me, which is VUCA, which a lot of people don't know about. And I'd love for you to explain, I think what we do recognize, from a military standpoint, as General Casey's always said, is first of all, you have to name it. What is the situation you're facing? You have to name it. And you name it, as we've named it, VUCA. So if you could explain to our audience what exactly is VUCA, number one, but number two, what role do we have to play in navigating these VUCA times?
Right. Mike, it's a great question. So we have a whole chapter, so I can back up just a little bit to give the macro picture of this. So what's going on in the world today is chaos, fog, and that's what happens in war. And you can have the best laid plans, as we've been in the military more than a couple hours, and you've been to combat, you know that you can have the best plans laid out, but when that first bullet is fired and the enemy gets a vote, then all the plans sometimes go awry, and there's chaos on the battlefield. And I've experienced that many times. I'm sure most of your listeners who have been to war, same thing. Well, VUCA is very common. I went to the Army War College, and we talk about the volatility of the volatile nature of war. So the V is volatile, and the ambiguous nature of war, and the chaotic nature of war. And so the VUCA is the acronym for what's really going on in battle. And so we take the VUCA and the chaos of war and the volatility of war and the ambiguousness of war, and we take it into the spiritual life, because right now, and you had just said it before we were talking, in your part of the world especially, there is a, darkness is formed over the Western United States especially, and the Eastern as well, and other parts of the country. Why is that? Because Satan wants to create chaos. He wants to cause division. He wants to create people to be upset, and the media is playing a big part of that. Satan, of course, is the master of the media waves. He is controlling the narrative. And so we find ourselves, if you find yourself in a chaotic place in your life, it's not unusual. A lot of people are fearful. A lot of people are afraid of what's really going on here, afraid of communism, socialism. Some are welcoming communism, so there's a lot of volatility going on. And our book really offers hope and to being prepared, because burying your head in the sand like a lot of churches are doing right now isn't going to help the parishioners. We're not making disciples anymore. We're making converts, and we're not really discipling people and understanding the fog of war or the center of gravity and other things we talk about through the book. I hope that helps.
Yeah, no, and I love this because you have a section of the book called Training in the End Times. And that is suggesting that we have a role to play, because training is active, right? It doesn't mean you get to sit on the bench and just wait. So it's all going to play out, and I'm just going to observe and see what happens. You guys talk about training in the end times. So what role do we have to play in that, David? I'll start with you, and then Troy, I'll go to you with the next one.
Yeah, people ask me, and of course, I'm the president of Battle Ready Ministries, and Troy's the vice president. And so what is battle? We go around the country and really around the world if needed to train disciples, pastors, leaders, and what it means to be battle ready. And the number one thing we tell people is not just be vigilant and understand the times we live in, but use the weapons of our warfare. I just don't give a civilian a weapon. The Army doesn't give a civilian a weapon and say, okay, go into battle now. No, they train the soldier how to use the weapon, and the doctrine behind the training and the weapon, use of the weapon, and the rules of engagement, the rules of war, and all that stuff. And so Christians need to be trained the same way. And the first weapon I talk about all the time is one of the most powerful ones we don't use is prayer. Speaking to God, getting empowered by God, getting motivated by God, and letting God speak to me, because he wants to speak to me. Maybe not, out here, but in my heart, in my mind, through circumstances, through reading of books, through education and training and spiritual warfare. So those are the kinds of things that we're telling people. if you really want to be prepared and ready and trained, those are the kinds of things we're going to need to do, think about, and pray about and read about, so we are properly ready for whatever is coming. And I'll add one more thing. A lot of Christians come up to me and say, hey, our pastors have always said, we're not going to see any of this because we're going to be raptured. We're going to be taken out of this, and we won't see the Antichrist. We won't see the problems. But what my answer to all that is this: what about the millions of Christians being persecuted around the world right now who haven't been raptured and may not be raptured for a while? I hope it does happen, but they're going through severe persecution in China, Iraq, Iran, Russia in the past, and other places of the world. They had to been prepared too for what the things that they're going through.
Yeah, I love that you guys mention prayer as the number one tool. The number one essentially weapon in your arsenal is prayer. And I love that because it really is something that I've used to guide me throughout, is seek him first, right? It requires us to act on our behalf first, which is to seek him first. Troy, this is going to be a really easy one for you. This is kind of a softball question, but where can people pick up the book, The Military Guide to Armageddon? It's a great book. I'm encouraging all our viewers to pick it up. Even if you do not have a relationship with Christ, I think it's a must-read book. It gives military concepts in here that you can then certainly apply to your own life. So that's what I love about this book. But where can people find it?
Yeah, so our publisher is Chosen Books, Baker Publishing Group. They have a bookstore called Baker Book House, and they actually offer a 30% discount on it. So that it's actually lower than Amazon, but it's also on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Christian Book, Hudson Booksellers, Target, Walmart, pretty much anywhere books are sold. It's been a #1 bestseller several times. It hit 129 out of 33 million books on Amazon shortly after it came out, and then 150 on Barnes and Noble. So we're very honored that people that bought so many copies of the book and said so many good things about it. Thank you for bringing us on today.
Yeah, 100%. Well, and also if they want to learn more about your organization, what's your guys' website so that they can learn more about how they can potentially deploy your skills, ability, training in their own organizations?
Yeah, if pastors or conferences, camps, different venues like to invite us to come do a battle ready warrior training or spiritual boot camp, they can go to battle-ready.org and find out more about that. And then our websites are troyanderson.us and davidjgiammona.com.
Yeah, wonderful. That is awesome. So, Chaplain, Colonel David, this one is for you. Lastly, what is the one thing you want people to remember to do when they get overwhelmed? Because that's a pretty big deal right now. People are, feeling pretty overwhelmed. So what do you want them to go, in the middle of the fog of war, in the middle of chaos, uncertainty, all this stuff, remember to do this. What is that?
Well, I can give a story first, a short one that will emphasize. So my assistant and I are in a training battleground in Germany years ago, and it's still there today, and is really one of the national training centers. We have one in Irvine in California, and we have one in Germany. I was one in Germany, and we're going from point A to point B in the middle of the night, trying to get back to headquarters, and the fog rolled in, and that was it. You could not see 5 feet in front of you. It was so thick. It was in Hohenfels. If some of you have been there, it's some of the most treacherous weather in the world there all at one day. So we stopped. There's nothing we could do but stop, because we didn't know where we were, and going forward it could be dangerous. We didn't know what we're going to run into. And we had to wait until the fog lifted in the morning. And so what I encourage people, and this is written really on my bedspread on my bed, so I see it every morning. It says, "Be still and know that I am the Lord." A lot of times when we're in chaos in our lives, things are not going well. It's a VUCA environment, and we don't know what to do. The best thing to do is do nothing at that point and just trust in the Lord and be still and hear his voice and wait for his guidance. And a lot of us don't like to wait, so we get further and further in trouble. but be still and know that I am the Lord is really an important weapon. Stillness is an important weapon in our warfare, that in our arsenal, that we don't use all the time, but to just be quiet before the Lord, listen to his still small voice like Elijah did, and he will talk to you and he will get you through. But a lot of times it just takes some patience and trust in the Lord.
Yeah, I love that. It's a great note to end on, and it rolls so quickly off your tongue, and people are like, okay, yeah, I can be still. But that is so hard in today's environment when we have so many external inputs, outputs, and to be still and actually listen, right? Be quick to listen, slow to speak. Just to be still sometimes is really difficult. And
Oh,
so
yeah.
it sounds so easy until you go to do it. My friend Mark Devine, he has mastered meditating for 20 minutes, and he's like, "What are you up to?" And I'm like 2 minutes. That's it. That's all I can get, because I either fall asleep or I got everything racing in my head. And you're talking about removing that distraction so that you can hear Christ, and I love that. So, Colonel and Troy, I want to thank you both for being on the Military Wire. It was a true pleasure for having you both on here. And I'm encouraging our viewers to pick up your book. So be sure you pick up the Military Guide to Armageddon. And for those of you who are looking to discover your new mission, purpose, identity after service, be sure to check us out at Operation Military Family. And we'll help you live on purpose with passion. So, gentlemen, thank you both for being on the Military Wire.
Thank you much.